The wind was a blade against Alara's skin, slicing through the threadbare wool of her shawl. It was a malevolent thing, this wind, smelling of ice and distant, empty plains. It scoured the land, just as shame had scoured her soul, leaving nothing but raw, exposed desperation. Each gust seemed to push the life from her, a steady, relentless pressure that mirrored the tightening deep in her belly. The sky, a bruised purple and gray, pressed down, heavy with the unshed promise of a storm that would surely be her end. Her feet were numb things, distant and clumsy, stumbling over the iron-hard ruts of the track that passed for a road. For days, the horizon had been a mercilessly straight line, broken only by the curvature of the earth. But now a smudge, a dark, solid shape against the dying light. A house, or the ghost of one. It was a stark, lonely silhouette, a testament to some stubborn refusal to be swallowed by the vastness. Hope, a feeling so foreign it was painful, flickered in her chest, a tiny, guttering candle flame. As she drew closer, the details resolved into weathered timber, a stone chimney breathing a thin plume of smoke, and a corral holding the dark shapes of horses, their heads bowed against the wind. It was a place of solitude, of hardness, a place that did not welcome strangers. The first true contraction seized her, a grinding fist that stole her breath and buckled her knees. She cried out, a sound snatched away by the wind. This was it. The time was upon her, here, at the edge of nothing. She crawled the last few yards, her hands raw against the frozen earth, and pulled herself up the 2 steps to the porch. The wood was splintered and gray, like old bone. Light, warm and yellow, bled from a single window. Inside, a figure moved, tall and broad-shouldered. He was a man made of the same harsh material as the land itself. Fear warred with a primal animal need. Fear was a luxury. Survival was not. When the door opened, he filled the frame, a silhouette against the warmth she so desperately craved. His face was shadow, but she could feel the weight of his gaze, assessing, silent. The words were a prayer torn from her throat, a ragged whisper almost lost to the rising gale. Please, sir. Another spasm racked her, and she clutched the swollen mound of her belly. The shame was a fire in her cheeks, but the urgency was a flood that extinguished it. Can I give birth in your shelter? His silence stretched, vast and terrifying like the plains at her back. She saw the glint of his eyes, the hard line of his jaw in the lamplight. She expected refusal, disgust, the door closing on her and the coming storm. She had seen it in the eyes of everyone in the town she had fled, the town that had cast her out. He was just a man. Why would he be any different? Then, he stepped back, pulling the heavy door wider. His voice was low, rough, like stone grating on stone, yet it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Get in. The warmth inside was a physical shock. It wrapped around her, smelling of wood smoke, old leather, and coffee. It made her tremble, the sudden cessation of the wind's assault leaving her weak and unmoored. The man, Silas, as she would later learn he was called, gestured with his chin toward a simple chair by the hearth. He did not touch her, did not offer a hand, yet the space he cleared for her was an act of profound charity. He moved with a quiet economy, his large frame navigating the Spartan room without a wasted step. He stoked the fire, the flames leaping up to cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. She watched him through a haze of pain and exhaustion, her senses taking in the small details of her salvation. The cabin was one room, meticulously clean. A bed neatly made stood in one corner, a simple table and 2 chairs in another. Shelves held a few worn books alongside tins of supplies. There were no decorations, no softness, save for the patchwork quilt folded at the foot of the bed. It was the space of a man who had stripped his life down to its barest essentials. He placed a tin cup of water on the small stool beside her chair. His hands were large and calloused, scarred from work she could only imagine, but his movements were deliberate and steady. He did not ask her name. He did not ask where she came from, or who was responsible for her state. The questions she had dreaded, the judgment she had anticipated. They never came. His silence was a bomb, a wide, empty space where she could simply be, without explanation or apology. As the hours passed, the storm outside broke in full fury, rattling the window panes and screaming around the eaves. Inside, her own storm raged. The pain came in relentless waves, pulling her under, leaving her gasping on the shore of each brief respite. Through it all, Silas was a constant, steady presence. He moved in the background, a silent sentinel. He brought her a bowl of thin broth, which she could not stomach, and then simply left it to cool. He laid a pile of clean, worn cloths on the table. He filled a large kettle and set it on the hearth to boil. His quiet competence was a lifeline. He was not a doctor, not a midwife, just a man who knew how to manage crises, whether they be a blizzard or a birthing. When the time came and her body was an instrument of pure, agonizing force, he was there. He did not speak words of comfort. She did not need them. What he offered was more vital. He braced her shoulders. He wiped her brow with a cool, damp cloth. His presence was an anchor in the tempest, solid and real, a promise that she was not alone in this wilderness. In the darkest hour of the night, as the wind howled its final furious crescendo, her son was born with a sharp, piercing cry that cut through the storm's roar. It was a sound of furious life in a room that had known only silence. Exhausted, hollowed out, Alara lay back, her world shrinking to the tiny, wrinkled creature now swaddled and placed in her arms. Silas pressed a cup of warm, sweet tea to her lips. In the flickering firelight, she saw his face clearly for the first time. It was a landscape of a face, carved by sun and wind. His eyes a startlingly clear gray. There was no pity in them, only a quiet, unreadable gravity. The storm outside had passed. The silence that fell was deep and profound, a silence of shared survival. In the weeks that followed, a fragile peace settled over the cabin, as gentle and quiet as the blanket of snow that now covered the world outside. The landscape, once a threat, was transformed into a thing of stark, pristine beauty. A new routine, unspoken and unnegotiated, took root. Silas would rise before dawn, his movements quiet so as not to wake her or the baby, whom she had named Rowan. The scent of coffee would be the first thing she noticed, a comforting ritual that marked the start of each day. He would tend to his horses and mend what was broken, a fence post, a leather strap, the latch on the barn door. He was a man who understood the constant, patient work of holding back entropy. Alara, in turn, found purpose in her hands again. As her strength returned, she began to contribute. She mended the tear in Silas's coat with neat, small stitches. She learned to bake a dense, hearty bread in the hearth oven. She kept the cabin tidy, creating a small pocket of order and warmth against the vast, cold emptiness outside. The silence between them changed. It was no longer the tense silence of strangers, but a comfortable, shared space. It was the silence of two people who had weathered a storm together and had no need for words to explain it. They communicated in small gestures. The way he left a pile of chopped wood by the door, the way she made sure his coffee was hot when he came in from the cold. One day, watching him through the window as he broke the ice in the water trough, his breath pluming in the frigid air, she realized the fear was gone. In its place was a quiet, deep-running gratitude that felt as solid and real as the log walls around her. This fragile world was shattered by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, a sharp, unwelcome intrusion into their silent sanctuary. A man on a fine black horse, a stark contrast to Silas's rugged stock, rode into the yard. Alara's heart seized. She knew him instantly. It was not the father of her child, but his brother Garrett, a man whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He dismounted, his movements arrogant, and strode to the door as if he owned the very ground. Silas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his body positioning itself naturally between the newcomer and the cabin door. Garrett's gaze flickered past Silas, dismissing him, and landed on Alara, who stood framed in the doorway, Rowan held tight against her chest. "There you are," Garrett said, his voice smooth and laced with contempt. We thought the coyotes had gotten you. Father is displeased. This little embarrassment needs to be dealt with. Give me the boy. The words were a physical blow. He wasn't here for her. He was here to erase a problem. He saw her son not as a person, but as a stain on his family's name. The old Alara, the shamed, terrified girl who had fled in the night, would have shrunk from his cruelty. But that girl was gone, burned away in the storm of childbirth and forged anew in the quiet strength of this place. She took a step forward, her chin lifted. No, she said. The word was not loud, but it was absolute. It was a stone dropped into a still pond. Garrett laughed, a short, ugly sound. Don't be a fool. What can you offer him here? This hovel? With this brute? He gestured dismissively at Silas. He will have a name, a future. Give him to me. Silas did not speak. He simply stood, a mountain of a man, his presence more eloquent than any threat. But it was Alara who met Garrett's gaze. She saw him for what he was. A small man, propped up by money and name, his power as brittle as a frozen branch. His name is Rowan, she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. And his future is with me. You will leave this place. Now Garrett's face hardened, his mask of civility slipping. He took a menacing step forward. I am not asking. In that moment Silas moved. It was a slight shift, a settling of his weight, but it was a promise of violence that was utterly convincing. He still said nothing, but his gray eyes were chips of ice. Garrett hesitated, his gaze flicking from Alara's defiant face to Silas's implacable stillness. He saw it then, a wall he could not breach. They were a unit, a fortress of two. His power, the power of shame and wealth, had no purchase here. With a final, venomous glare, he turned, swung himself back onto his horse, and spurred it away, leaving churned, sullied snow in his wake. They stood together on the porch, watching until Garrett was just a dark speck swallowed by the white expanse. The silence that descended was not empty. It was filled with the echoes of the battle won, the weight of a shared victory. The sharp, cold air felt clean, purified. Silas turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or affirmation. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture that said more than 1,000 words of praise ever could. A world of understanding passed between them in that silent moment of acknowledgement. He would not have fought her battle for her, she realized. He had simply stood ready to be the shield she needed to fight it herself. Later, as dusk painted the snow in hues of rose and lavender, he spoke, his voice as low and steady as ever. He won't be back. Alara looked down at Rowan, sleeping peacefully in her arms, his small face a portrait of untroubled innocence. I know, she replied, and the certainty in her own voice was a revelation. This cabin, which had first seemed a prison of necessity, was now a sanctuary. This man, who had been a fearsome stranger, was now a partner. She had arrived here seeking shelter to give birth to her child, but in the crucible of that storm, in the quiet strength of the days that followed, she had given birth to herself. Home, she understood, was not a place you found, but a thing you built. It was built of shared silence and quiet acts of care. It was built of standing your ground against the world, with someone standing beside you. Strength was not the absence of fear, but the courage to cradle your child and face down the ghosts of your past. The next morning, she looked out the window to see Silas mending the section of fence near the corral. His movements were patient, rhythmic, restorative. He was a man who knew how to make things whole again. He paused, as if feeling her gaze, and looked toward the house. His eyes met hers across the snow-dusted yard. He offered no smile, only a slight, almost imperceptible lift of his chin. A quiet acknowledgement. Promise. Alara drew Rowan closer, her heart full, and returned the nod. The world outside was vast and cold, but it was no longer menacing. It was just a landscape, and within it they had carved out a life. It was a small life, a quiet life, but it was theirs, and it was enough.